I wanted to talk about the Miller Lite beer, world's largest party, with Randy Quaid. This was an event that I read about in mid 1989, and it captivated me because this was going to be the world's largest party, advertised for really more than a year before Labor Day 1989, and it was hosted by Randy Quaid, the actor and Texan, and this was really a blitz advertising, and it was going to be at the Astrodome, and 120,000 people were going to cavort, and they didn't even announce who the entertainment was going to be, just this is the world's largest party. So the slogan for this was, we're having a party, and it was to benefit the Special Olympics. Now that set off some reaction right away because there's fetal alcohol syndrome, which is related to alcohol use in pregnancy. And so Jim Smith, assisting at Doc, and I fired off a letter to the Special Olympics and questioned why they would want to take money from an alcohol company, and expressed our dismay. And we urged them to rethink about this, and talked about the kids suffering from fetal alcohol syndrome. Jim also participated in a press conference with Bobby Hurd, who was head of Texans War on Drugs, and a group of about 20 organizations protested this, and did a couple of news conferences in a couple of cities to talk about alcohol problems being as big an issue, if not bigger, than other drugs. So the newspapers were not exactly on side, since they were getting a lot of money from the advertising for this, and huge ads all over the state. But there were a couple of editorial cartoonists who caught on and did allude to the hypocrisy of having Mothers Against Drunk Drivers on the one hand and the world's biggest party on the other. So we sent out a press release, and we announced we would be creating T-shirts that we would sell at the Astrodome on the Labor Day event that said, instead of Killer Lite beer, we're having a party. We said, instead of Miller Lite beer, we're having a party. We said Killer Lite beer, we're pushing a drug, and we listed cirrhosis, alcoholic hepatitis, fetal alcohol syndrome, pancreatitis, and impotence alongside it in very similar logo. And on the back, instead of we're having a party, we had a guy grabbing a toilet and throwing up, and he said, they're having a party, I'm grabbing a potty. And this appeared, we sent out a press release, and we had great coverage in the Houston Post and Houston Chronicle. And breweries' sponsorship has opponents fizzing over Special Olympics benefit, said the Post, and D.J. Wilson's great story in the local news. And then no sooner did we have that article appear and went out to the event and sold a few T-shirts, then the next day we received well, actually, it was a little bit later than that. I was out in California, and we received a subpoena to appear in court that was filed in both federal and state court, literally tearing us limb from limb and saying that we had violated copyright and we had confused people and they wanted damages, and we had done all sorts of, I think they call it tortious interference with a contract. And the law firm was Andrews and Kurth, which is important because they're known for being a medical malpractice defense firm. So Jim Smith was frantic when we got this thing. I was away in California. He said, you've got to get back. We're being sued in court. You've got to appear tomorrow. Well, I couldn't get back in time to appear, but Judge David West in the Texas State Court really got furious at them and called it a nuisance suit and told him to get out of his courtroom. And the story appeared, judge allows T-shirt bashing Miller party. And so actually this went on before the event. And so the event occurred, and it was indeed the biggest party in town, 120,000 people, huge coverage. And it was about a month later that the lawsuit was continuing. And by this point, I had not found an attorney. I tried, and without quite realizing who was suing me, the Andrews and Kurth law firm, I called every medical malpractice defense firm in town, and I learned, much to my dismay, that they would not take this case because most of them were on retainers from Philip Morris and other tobacco companies. So there you have it, medical malpractice defense companies defending beer and cigarette promoters, and it didn't look good. And there was even one time I met on a plane a guy named, I think, Stephen Solomon, who was the defense attorney for the Jim Wright, who was the former U.S. House of Representatives Speaker, who had violated certain laws, and he had as his attorney Steve Solomon, and I saw him on an airplane, and I told him about my plight, and he said, well, it's very interesting. I'll let you know. And a few days later, I saw that his name appeared in Mississippi defending the tobacco companies in a lawsuit there. So really, it looked pretty bleak. We weren't going to be able to get any kind of representation. A wonderful man named William Wade did contact me and even was willing to file a brief in response to the lawsuit. And I was just about to go with him when I decided to call the ACLU, which still had a chapter in Houston. And this wonderful secretary answered the phone. And I say wonderful because had she not listened, I don't know what would have happened. But she thought that the case sounded very interesting. She said, hold on, I'll ask Bruce. He got on the phone, and absolutely wonderful fellow, head of the ACLU, who said, I think this is a case that we can handle for you, and we can help you find an attorney. And they did. A guy named Rick Knight in a firm called Morris and Campbell. And immediately he set upon responding to them and looking for a way to settle this. But I stuck to my guns, and I would not really admit that we had done anything wrong. The only thing that we had to do when we finally did reach a settlement, not very long after Rick took the case, was to really agree that we weren't going to violate the First Amendment. So the story attained national news coverage. Newsweek, Wall Street Journal, American Medical News. Tony Lang of the Cincinnati Enquirer wrote a great piece ridiculing Philip Morris, which had sponsored the Bill of Rights tour a few years earlier, or not even that long earlier, right about that same time. Here they are championing the Bill of Rights and suing us for making fun of a beer company. Paul Harrison of the Houston Post wrote 3 columns and talked about Philip Morris's SLAPP suit, which stands for Stop Legal Access to Public Participation, a classic case in which a big company sues the little guy. And ultimately, though, we prevailed, and I say though because we turned our focus to the Special Olympics. And medical student Patrick Whalen, who was head of the local Mothers Against Drunk Driving chapter, and I submitted an entry, one of Patrick's photographs called Med Student Beer Bust, and we actually won first prize in the Miller Lite Beer Best Beer Party photo. And we went to the Special Olympics to receive our gift, which was a $400 camera. And then I pretty much lit into the woman who was at the Special Olympics and chastised her for really taking money from an alcohol promoter, and it's the wrong thing to do. And the woman started to cry, and it was very awkward, and we really got to her. She certainly realized that this was not a good promotion, but there's nothing she could do about it. She was probably taking her orders from a national group. And the next day, Paul Harrison's column was pretty much criticizing us for going overboard. And it was a good lesson because you can't expect a reporter to always follow, because we invited him along, what he thought he'd be writing. But I think we saw what's the right way to go about something and what's not. I think we were perfectly correct in our criticism of the Special Olympics, but the way I really confronted a woman who was really just a local representative and not anyone in any kind of position to refute them or to question the nationals taking money from Philip Morris and Miller Beer, I think I would have done it a little differently in retrospect. But the T-shirts sold. Doug Minkler's Killer Lite Beer T-shirts are, I hope, collector's items. And I think we succeeded in getting out the word that the way to counteract alcohol promotions is to laugh the pushers out of town. They didn't go out of town. They're still probably as big as ever. But I think that humor, parody, satire, ridicule remains the way to call attention to what they're doing.